But it is good. I'm glad that we're here. I'm glad that you're here. And I'm really privileged. I'm blessed to be invited up to speak to you guys tonight and be able to look out over a group of men, and like Peter's already said, young guys, older guys, a whole bunch of people who've said, yeah, I want to be here tonight. And for whatever reason, I don't know what reason it is that you're here tonight, whether you just always come or whether someone invited you and you're here for the first time, but welcome, and it's good that you're here. And I've been asked to share a little bit of my story to start off, and it's going to be the potted version. It's the very short version of my story, so if there's anything there, I can't hang around till midnight or anything, but if there's anything here that sort of interests you, feel free to grab me afterwards while we're having a cup of tea or coffee and just ask a little bit more. But I'm the son of two parents. I'm a missionary kid. My mum and dad met in Sydney at Sydney Missionary Bible College. Dad's a Tassie boy. He was born and raised in Wynyard, so I count myself a Wynyard boy. And for those of you who have been in the area for a while and might be from Wynyard, I am one of the Wynyard Wilsons, and my grandfather was one of the ones who started the Wilson Brothers store. So my grandfather was Jack Wilson in Wynyard, if that rings a bell with anybody, and my dad was Mike. He was the youngest of Jack's kids, and he worked as a journalist for a little while, and then went to Sydney to work in a newspaper and was recommitted his life to Christ while he was in Sydney, and went to Bible college and met my mum there. And both of them separately to each other felt that God was calling them to the Middle East. And so they married, they came back to Wynyard. I arrived on the scene, and as a 15-month-old, I headed off to the other side of the world. So at 15 months, Mum and Dad arrived with me, and none of the stuff that they'd packed, apart from a couple of suitcases, they have still to this day have no idea where the 44-gallon drums and the tea chests went. None of it arrived, apart from what they carried off the plane. And we arrived in Lebanon. It was in the middle of a civil war, so that might be where some of that stuff disappeared to. And we lived in Lebanon for a little while, and the civil war got too hot. There was too much going on to raise a family and be safe there, and so the mission actually moved us on. And Mum and Dad tell the story of the neighbour at the back of their place where they were living at the time, who would jump up on the back fence with an AK-47, fire it off into the air, and tell them confidently that he was protecting them from anything that might turn up. He said, "I protect you!" Fire off another few up into the air and hop back down again, and a little while later he'd be back up again. They moved to Jordan. My brother was born in Jordan. This is in the 1970s. They had some time in the United Arab Emirates. They had time, and most of our time was spent in Cyprus. And I have really fond memories of my growing up. I was on the mission field, or Mum and Dad were on the mission field until I'd finished grade 10, so I was 16 when we came home. And so most of all those formative years were spent growing up overseas. And I just had a couple of things that really came to me as real memories of that time. One was how I grew up. I grew up not just in a Christian family, a Christian home, but I grew up among a Christian extended family. That the mission that we were a part of was quite a small mission, and everyone in it was family. I grew up with this diverse group of people who all loved God, but they came from Australia, they came from the UK, they came from Canada, they came from South Africa, they came from all over the place. And I think that shaped something of who I am, something of my love of diversity and just a willingness to sort of see people who they are, and it certainly cemented in me that love of God and that love of serving. because that's what all of these people had done. Mum and Dad included, had left home, had left family, or had brought family with them, had lost stuff, and had given themselves to serve. And that was something really important for me growing up. My teenage years were kind of normal in many ways. For me, they were anyway. When I start talking about this, and when I talk to my wife Linda, who grew up in Scottsdale and just spent her entire life growing up in the northeast of Tasmania, it blows her mind that, you know, what was normal for me was growing up on the other side of the world with people speaking a different language and with Mum and Dad doing missionary work. But that was my normal. That was what life was for me. And in a lot of ways, my teenage years were normal. Identity, trying to work out who I was, trying to fit in. You know, I've had these glasses since grade 4. I've had this kind of build since, you know, I was a kid. So I was never one of the really cool groups. I wasn't one of the sporty types. I was always doing too well at school to really fit into, you know, anyone who was really doing anything, you know, really cool at the time. And so that whole aspect of where do I fit, where, you know, do I want to be part of this group, do I want to be part of that group, that was all very real for me. Growing up, that was always something that, you know, I wasn't ever sure whether I was in or out. And that's hard as a teenager. That's a difficult spot to be. And, you know, some of you young guys here might know what I'm talking about there. I tried some stuff as a teenager, like smoking in grade 8, and also gave up in grade 8. All it took was the vice principal to catch me in the school grounds with a mate of mine who was the one who mainly led me into this sort of stuff. And all he had to do the next day was eyeball me and say, "Not going to do that again, are you?" I went, "Oh, yes, sir." And that was it. I gave up. So I wasn't ever the rebel. I wasn't ever trying to be the bad guy or trying to do bad stuff. I just sort of ended up doing some of those things as a teenager. And boys, you're not allowed to say anything tomorrow. All right? No one needs to know that Mr. Wilson did that in grade 8. I gave my life to Christ at 13. If you want to have a time frame for that, we were back home. It was at Riverbend at a youth camp, and something to the life of me cannot remember what the guy said that night, but something that he said made me know that I needed to do something. I think that's a fairly famous footy line. I knew that I had to do something with God that night. The worst thing I could come up with for the guy who came to pray with me was that I was mean to my brother and sister sometimes. That was about all I had to repent of at that stage. And I made up for that with some of the other stuff that happened later on, but I knew I had to do something with God at that point in my life. And I knew from that point that God had me and that He would take me on from there. I came home to Tassie when I was 16. I went to Helier College, and that just sort of went through. I did my stuff, did my work, handed in my assignments, made some good friends, and then headed off to uni. And that was a really special time. Uni's that time where, for me, it was that time where it was breaking away from home. It was that independence. So you're living out of home, you're living on your own, you're making your own choices. And so that there was a really important time as a faith journey. That was a time for me where I had to decide for myself, where am I going to go with this? Is this going to be my own faith? Is this going to be something that is for me? Because I've got to make all the choices now. I've got to decide whether I'm going to get up on Sunday morning and I'm going to find myself a church family to be a part of. I've got to decide whether I'm going to live my faith as an individual and not just as a kid in Mum and Dad's house. And that was a really important time, and it was good, by the way. I met some great guys down there. I had a great group of Christian friends, and we encouraged each other in that. And I think I made that transition well, and I enjoyed stepping out, and I enjoyed, I guess, that change from a kid to an adult. And I enjoyed finding myself a church family. I enjoyed making my own way. I enjoyed meeting my future wife that was a bit of a highlight of university. We met early on. We were going out not far into my first year. We were engaged at the end of third year, and we got married just after we finished uni together. We'd been down in Hobart for 4 years, and that's a really special time to know that you've met that person that you're going to make a commitment to for the rest of your life. And I keep telling her this, I am more in love with Linda now than I was then, and that's no reflection on how much in love I was then, but the more you spend time with someone, the more you know who they are, and the more that love can grow. A significant time for me, in halfway through my second year, I was getting prepared for exams at university, and I got a phone call from Mum. I was literally sitting at my desk studying for my physics exam. Didn't like physics, but I was working my way through it, and got a phone call from Mum, and I knew something was wrong right away. And she said, "Tim, I need to tell you something." She said, "Dad's died." I was 12 days away from my 20th birthday. It's actually coming up. It's the 18th of June, 94. And he'd had a cardiac arrest mowing the lawn. It was not a heart attack, but a cardiac arrest. It's like a power surge through your heart. And he was gone before the ambulance even got there. And that was a really tough time for us as a family. That's one of those moments, one of those life events that just shapes you, and shapes you in ways, shaped me probably in ways that I still don't even really know. But it was also a really important step in my faith journey. My brother really struggled with that. He's 3.5 years younger than me. He's walked away from church and whatever faith he had, not just I think because of Dad's death, but a range of other different things, but he's not walking with God right now. But for me it was a time where again I had to make that choice of, God, this is horrible. This hurts. But I still believe that you're there. This is no reflection on you, God, or your goodness or your love for me. And I actually grew in my faith. Dad was a very spiritual guy. He journaled a lot. And as part of my grief, when he died, I started reading through his journals and spent a lot of time just reading what my own dad had written. And I guess understanding him more. I was only just at 20 beginning to get to that stage of relating to Dad as an adult, and only just beginning to understand who he was, and getting through some of those father-son layers that can sometimes be there. And so it was great for me. It was a really important thing for me to be able to read through what he'd written, read through his faith journey, read through some of his struggles, and just be able to take that on board. And it strengthened my own faith, and it allowed me to keep going and to keep growing in what God had for me. First years of marriage and teaching were hard. I think I thought that, like most of the other things in my life, things would just kind of continue on smoothly, and there were some things about marriage early on, and there were some things about teaching that made me realise I'd never really felt like I'd failed before in life. There'd been some stuff that had been a bit hard, but particularly teaching, first couple of years of teaching, for the first time ever, I actually felt like I was a failure because teaching is a hard gig, I tell you what. And for an introvert like me, teaching is a really hard gig. And to have survived 21 years of it and still be enjoying it at the moment is it's a gift of God. But those first few years were a time where I realised some of the flaws in myself. I had to face some of the things about myself that when you put two people right together 24/7, that we'd never been like that before, and the first few years of marriage and those first few years of teaching made me face a few things in myself that I hadn't realised were there, but they come out when you're under pressure, and they come out when you're on the edge of failure, and you think, I didn't know that, I don't like that, I don't like that about myself, I don't like how I react to that, I don't like how this makes me feel. And again, you've got to go back and say, God. And God seemed distant in those times. Talk about a bit of a dry patch. It was hard to reach out to God when you feel like you're on the edge of failure. It's hard to reach out when you, as a bloke, you don't quite feel like you're meeting the mark. Because we like to know that we're doing all right. We don't like to be able to say things aren't good. That's hard for us to do. And so even to say that to God can be a hard thing to do. And I found that hard. I found those first few years, I knew it was there. I had my faith, we were going to church, all that sort of stuff was in place. But I just knew in my own heart, God and I were struggling to connect. And I knew that most of that was on my end. But God's good. God's good. And I just thank God for His grace, God's grace that says He doesn't let go. He says, I'm not going to let you go. I don't care about that stuff. And God got me through, and God allowed me to teach long enough to start to get the hang of it and to feel like I was going to do okay. And God allowed Linda and I to work through things and, to feel like we got to a stage where we were actually pedaling together and we were on track and we knew each other and we knew who we were and we knew our flaws, but we also knew our strengths, and we were able to work that together. And I'm now into my 21st year of teaching. I've had 17 years in the public system, and I now teach at Leyland. This is my 4th year at Leyland Christian School in Ulverston. Linda and I have 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. Benjamin's 14 and he's with me at school in grade 8. Daniel's 12, he's in grade 6, and Melanie's 9, nearly 10, she's in grade 4. And they're beautiful kids. I've been in church leadership for the last 17 years, and I'm currently helping lead a new church that started up. We're only 2 years old, or less than. We're not even 2 years old as a church, and God's just doing some amazing stuff in that group of people who He's brought together. We could not have envisioned anything like what God has put in place, and the last couple of years have just been absolute proof that when you give something to God, when you kind of strike out new, when you take a couple of risks, God can do some amazing things with that if you give Him a bit of a free hand. And as blokes, again, that's hard for us to do. We kind of like to hold on to stuff. We kind of like to know that we've got the steering wheel and we're in control. We're not great passenger drivers. My dad used to drive. My mum was a better driver than my dad, to be honest. But Mum was a more confident driver. And it was funny, we've had a joke as kids for years that every now and again Dad would let Mum drive. Mum would drive more confidently than Dad, and we had this joke that there was this one family trip that we were on where Dad let Mum drive, and Dad was sitting in the front of the car pretending to read a book or a magazine or something, just to show that he was relaxed. Except at some point one of us kids realised that the magazine was upside down. And we said, "You're not reading that, Dad. You're just hanging on tight, hoping that Mum doesn't do anything bad." We like to hold tight, don't we? As blokes, we like to know that we've got the steering wheel, that we've got some control over a situation. We don't like to be out of control. But it's God who needs to be in control. And sometimes when we hold too tight, that steering wheel doesn't turn the direction that He wants it to, because we've actually got hold of this side of it. And so the last couple of years have been, with the leadership that I'm with, just an amazing journey into allowing God to take more control and just seeing what happens when He does. So I think that's about me. There's a fair bit more in there, as you probably realise, but I think that's probably good for now. Yeah, thanks guys.